Now, fundamentally speaking, a story is made up of three parts. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. So, no story is ever complete without these three parts. It has to have a beginning, it has to have a middle, and it has to have an end. We can say the same thing in a different way. A story always begins with an incident. The incident is usually also the issue or the main subject of the story. It then goes to the next stage, which is conflict. Now, as we know, any issue has to first go through a stage of conflict, and ultimately there is resolution. This is also known as the three-act structure in theatre and in other parlance. So it begins with, the incident is usually the beginning, where you introduce the issue or the subject. It then goes on to conflict, where there are different kinds of opposition and different kinds of other characters who enter the story, and there's a conflict, and finally there is a resolution. Now, we need not be bound by these three occurring in a certain predefined order. You can always begin your story with the conflict, then establish what the issue was or the incident was, and then come to the resolution. So the choice is basically pretty free what you want to play around with. Now, what is important to understand in terms of story is that a story is what will guide what you edit. Now, often you will be faced with this issue: which scene has to come first, which shot has to be chosen, which sequence will make more engaging than the other, which combination will be more interesting. All these creative choices and all these creative decisions will be guided solely by your concept of what is your story. Depending upon what is your story, that will automatically give you what should be your beginning, middle and end, and what will be your choice of shots, sequence and scenes. Now, before we wrap up our lesson on story, let us cover one important and very critical concept, which is point of view. Now, you would imagine, what is a point of view? Now, as we all know, a story is made up of characters, and depending upon what kind of story it is, your number of characters in every story could obviously differ. Some stories have only one character, some stories can have as many as 50 to 100 characters. So if there are so many characters in a story, how does a person decide which characters are important, which are not that important? And doesn't the story become confusing if there are so many characters telling their individual stories? So the concept that helps you clarify and cut through this entire confusion is point of view. So when you are editing a story, you also decide right from the beginning who are your key characters and who are your secondary characters. And accordingly, you decide that the story eventually has to resolve the key characters' issues, and the secondary characters will only help in resolving the issues of the key characters. So now we understand what is a point of view. So a point of view is nothing but from whose point of view we are going to be seeing the same story. The same story can occur different, told from different people's point of view. So when our story is told from the key character's point of view, that becomes the point of view of the story. So with this we come to the end of our lesson on story. As we saw, a story essentially has three parts, a beginning, middle and end. And a point of view plays a very, very important role in understanding what your story will be about.